Hi, I'm Noah Glazer, and today I'm going to be giving this presentation on behalf of myself and my colleagues, Dr. Matthew Schmidt and Dr. Carla Schmidt from the University of Florida. Today I'm going to be talking to you about some research that we conducted in the summer of 2019 related to the use of virtual reality head-mounted displays for adults with autism spectrum disorders. To begin, I'd like to talk to you about what autism is. Autism is a developmental disorder that is often associated with impairments along social, communicative, and behavioral domains. In the United States, autism is found in 1 out of 59 children, and it impacts boys more than it impacts girls. Because of these impairments, people with autism tend to lead lower qualities of life, such as having difficulties finding and holding meaningful employment, difficulties maintaining relationships leading to social isolation, and problems with living independent lives. Autism is also associated with a variety of other comorbidities and exists on a spectrum, meaning that no two people with autism are alike. The way that these symptoms present varies in each individual. Because of these difficulties, researchers have been interested in developing interventions for individuals with autism for many years now. Over the past few decades, virtual reality has emerged as being particularly promising for this population. This is in part because of the affordances that virtual reality holds. Virtual reality environments allow for users to practice and develop skills in an environment that is authentic and safe and controllable. Virtual reality also allows for a high degree of experimental control, which means that researchers can adapt and modify their environment to meet the needs of individual learners, which, as I said earlier, because autism is a spectrum condition, this is vitally important. People with autism also tend to be concrete thinkers, meaning that they oftentimes have difficulties generalizing skills that they learn from one context to a more abstract context. Because of this, researchers have been particularly interested in trying to exploit the affordances of telepresence that virtual reality and their associated head-mounted displays can provide. What I mean by this is that if users are able to feel more physically immersed, that is, having their senses and stimuli provided by the computer interface, or more psychologically present, feeling like they are within the actual virtual environment, then research on telepresence suggests that the skills that they practice and develop and learn in that virtual environment can take on a deeper meaning, and that those skills can transfer out into the real world. Head-mounted displays like those seen here, like the Oculus Rift on the left and the Google Cardboard and Google Daydream on the right, can help promote those sensations of telepresence. Because of this, researchers are continuously turning to these new commercially available headsets. However, there are still many gaps in the literature concerning the use of head-mounted displays for individuals with cognitive disabilities such as autism. In 1996 and 1997, Dorothy Strickland and her colleagues set out to study whether or not people with autism could use these head-mounted displays and if they would find the experiences to be pleasurable. And while the results were largely positive, the field on the whole ultimately decided that head-mounted displays were inappropriate for use for people with autism. One of the primary reasons for this was that headsets at the time oftentimes weighed upwards of 15 to 20 pounds. And I don't know about you, but I would not want to have one of those sitting on my head for an extended period of time. Also, these headsets were known to cause issues related to cybersickness, which is the adverse feeling of discomfort or distress that you can exhibit while undergoing virtual reality scenarios. And symptoms oftentimes look like gastrointestinal distress. It looks like feeling dizzy. It looks like peripheral symptoms of feeling, having eye strain, or sophite distress like feeling clammy or fatigued. And research has shown that upwards of 80% of people who use head-mounted displays exhibit these kinds of symptoms, and that these symptoms can last up to 5 hours after use of using a head-mounted display. Even more alarming is that the vast majority of research conducted on cybersickness has been on people who are neurotypical, and there has been almost no research at all considering people with cognitive disabilities such as autism, which makes the use and implementation of these devices to be a potential ethical concern. Because of this, the vast majority of research in the field has been on desktop-based virtual reality systems, where instead of using these headsets, users control an avatar through a use of a keyboard or a mouse or some other kind of USB attachment. To address some of these gaps in the literature, we set out to examine the following research questions. First of all, we wanted to know what was the character of cybersickness the participants would experience while using a virtual reality environment called Virtuoso. Number two, we wanted to examine how these cybersickness symptoms would compare between participants with autism and participants from a neurotypical comparison group. And number three, we wanted to see how the use of these virtual reality headsets would influence the learning experience of participants with autism while they use the Virtuoso software suite. These three research questions were examined through a multi-method approach that utilized a combination of field notes, video recordings, structured interviews, and a variety of quantitative measures. And as I mentioned, we included participants that were both neurotypical and participants with autism, because the field already knows how individuals that are neurotypical react to head-mounted displays. So we wanted to have that data that we can compare to see if individuals with autism were experiencing cybersickness in a different way. Now, this research was conducted as part of a larger usage test of a virtual reality intervention called Virtuoso. As part of this research, we implemented a stage-wise approach where participants would come in over 3 distinct sessions, where they would be first introduced to some kind of video-based virtual reality environment that we refer to as SVVR, for spherical video-based virtual reality, and then they would proceed into a fully immersive VR environment where they would actually control an avatar and interact within the environment to complete training tasks related to catching a public transportation system. In the first session, they came into the lab and they watched a quick introduction video in an Oculus Rift, and then they completed a training activity. A week later, they would come back and they would watch 4 videos that modeled a variety of skills to them related to catching a bus within an application called Virtuoso SVVR that took place in a lower immersive headset such as the Google Cardboard. And then they would complete a Virtuoso VR that we refer to as level 1, which was a heavily scaffolded and low fidelity version of the environment where we reduced some of the complexities and it didn't include as much detail. And then lastly, they would come back a week later to watch the same 4 videos, but in a higher immersive headset, in this case the Oculus Rift, and then they would complete Virtuoso VR level 2, which had less instructional scaffolds and greater degree of fidelity and complexities in the world, where we added things like non-playable characters, park benches, trees, and a lot more detail to the world. So now I'm going to talk to you about the research findings from this study. For our first research question, which is related to the evidence and character of cybersickness as participants with ASD used Virtuoso, we found 12 qualitative instances of cybersickness across all of these research sessions. 3 of those came from participant observations in a video analysis, and 9 came from an interview where we directly asked them how they were feeling after each activity. And these qualitative instances came from 5 out of the 6 participants who went through this study. Of this, central domain symptoms, that is feeling dizzy, were the most commonly observed symptoms. What's even more interesting is that once we brought in the data from the quantitative surveys to measure cybersickness, is that we saw a triangulation around the qualitative evidence. In every case where a participant made some kind of statement about a symptom that they were feeling, the quantitative score from this measure corroborated what we had found. Further, as we took the scores from the motion sickness assessment questionnaire from our participants with autism, what we found is that aggregate scores tended to increase as participants went through the training environment to the more visually complex and stimulating session 2. But also of note is that the highest overall value of these aggregate scores was only that of 32.7 out of 100, and the highest average dimension score was only that of a 20.5, indicating that scores for participants with autism were relatively low. Next, when we move on to research question 2 of trying to compare those symptoms of cybersickness across participants with autism and that of the neurotypical peers, what we found is that across the board, scores tended to trend upwards as they moved across the 3 research questions. However, participants with autism did tend to have slightly higher scores in all the research sessions, and as you can see here, that became more pronounced at session 2, which was, again, the most complex and stimulating environment. However, scores remain relatively low, being less than 25 out of 100 for both groups, suggesting that symptoms were relatively minimal. Lastly, I'm going to talk to you about this third research question, which is related to the impact of the head-mounted displays on the learning experiences of the participants with autism. And what we found is that despite some evidence of cybersickness, the participants overwhelmingly found these experiences to be positive. Nobody asked to leave early, and all the sessions were completed. And for the most part, the different head-mounted displays were found to be comfortable. The only evidence of some kind of discomfort of these headsets was some participants said that their arms got tired holding the Google Cardboard to their head, as it does not have a head strap. We also found that the head-mounted displays and controllers generally promoted accessibility, though there were some controller issues with the Rift that I'll talk to you about here in a second. So moving on into the discussion and implications, there are 4 primary themes that I want to talk to you about in this discussion, the first of which is related to cybersickness. As previously mentioned, evidence of cybersickness across both the research groups was relatively minimal, with the ASD group showing slightly more severe symptoms. Also in both groups, these scores and evidence of cybersickness did tend to increase as participants went through the more complex and visually stimulating sessions. However, I do want to note that while these symptoms and scores were relatively low, being less than 25 out of 100 aggregated, that these scores varied by participant, with some participants having higher scores than others. Next, I want to talk to you about this idea of a multi-phase design that you've seen, where we split the research sessions into these 3 distinct phases. This was based off of other work in the field that has been shown to reduce adverse effects such as cybersickness. And we posit that doing such a design has promoted the health and safety of our participants, as it allows for frequent check-ins and breaks from using these head-mounted displays. We highly recommend that future designers should consider such an approach, not just for individuals with autism, but for all virtual reality designers. Next, I want to talk to you about this idea of the control scheme. As I mentioned, there were some controller accessibility issues related to that of the Oculus Rift controllers. The Oculus Rift controllers are set up where you hold a left and a right controller shaped like a wand, and typically they interact like that of a video game controller, with the left Joy-Con allowing you to move your avatar left, right, forward, and back, and the right joystick allowing you to rotate your avatar. We saw evidence that this caused more confusion than not, and that participants were trying to move their avatar by rotating their body and not by rotating their avatar with the controller. So in the future, we would recommend making an avatar rotation system based off of that of the actual user's physical rotation. There's also evidence to show that this can help to reduce cybersickness, as that disconnect of the physical movement and the psychological sensation that the brain perceives as they interact within an environment can cause adverse effects. There's also some evidence to suggest that an on-rail system could be beneficial at reducing cognitive load and helping users get through the system. However, there is one caveat with that, and that is if you're trying to promote spatial awareness skills, then there's some evidence in the field that shows that an on-rail system could be detrimental. Lastly, since we have done this research, there's been an emergence of these wireless head-mounted displays. Typically, the headsets that we have used and have been available since around 2015 and 2016 have required that they be tethered to high-end gaming computers that can cost anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000. So with these new head-mounted displays, you don't have to tether them because they have their own built-in graphics card, which makes them cheaper and more accessible than ever before. This also has implications on immersion, because you don't have to worry about people tripping over sensors and wires, and you can design a control scheme that allows for a more natural movement system because you don't have to worry about people hurting themselves, which, as I said, of course, has implications on cybersickness. So with that, I'm going to conclude this session. Feel free to reach out to me or anyone from the research team if you have any questions. I will leave our contact information in the description here on the video. Thank you so much.